Digital Supply Chain and Resilience 2026 virtual event. So I am your moderator. I'm Jen Manning. I'd like to welcome everybody to the event. And just a quick reminder, we will have a chat function shortly in the right-hand side, and we'll have a short span of time at the end to ask questions of our panelists. And we'll select some of the top questions that we see going through, and we'll try to address them. Now, with that, I'm going to introduce our panel. So today we have with us Daniel Warman, so Director, Supply Chain Operations of Medable Inc. Dax Middlebrooks, Senior Director, Supply Chain Evolution, Motion Solutions. Matt Johnson, Head of Distribution and Manufacturing, Pivotry. Cara Farias, Director, Supply Chain and Operations, Planet Art. And I'm your moderator. I am Jen Manning. I am a digital agriculture supply chain consultant. All right, and with that, today our panel discussion is on the Resilient Supply Chain 2030, how AI, geopolitics, and digital transformation are redefining global operations. We have a bunch of questions here we're going to ask our panel. We're going to see what intriguing and insightful responses they have to this. And a reminder too, at the end, if you have some really good questions, please bring them up in the chat box, and we'll try our best to answer a couple of them. Those that we don't get around to later on, we will give it our best try to answer those separately in an email. All right, and with that, we're going to get started. Our first question here is on AI and digital transformation. This is a question to Matt. Everyone is talking about AI. Where is AI genuinely creating value today, and where is it mostly hype?
Yeah, thanks, Jen, and good morning, everybody. Good afternoon. Pleased to be here and join this panel of people that are probably a lot smarter than me when it comes to the digital supply chain. But I come from a background in B2B commerce and specifically around managing product information and the complexity involved in that world. And so I'm on the front lines, helping distributors and manufacturers solve some of their problems around digital commerce experience and the supply chain associated with that in the back end, of course. And being an older millennial, I can say that I have lived the digital transformation experience. And so I watched organizations. I've been in manufacturing and distribution really my entire career. So I've kind of watched this evolution happen. And it reminds me all of the interest and the experimentation and the various ways organizations are implementing AI today. Reminds me a lot of the first B2B commerce waves that we saw. And, on the surface, it seemed fairly simple, right? The idea was, okay, take some product information, take my catalog, put it online, make it accessible to my customers and to my supply chain partners, and begin transacting. Well, it's easier said than done. So why do we still struggle with this, and why are organizations struggling to see the value in AI? Where is their hesitancy, right? So the way I've seen it recently, when I talk to organizational leaders in AI, and specifically, I'm seeing more and more roles tagged with that as their core responsibility. Most of these are kind of in two places, right? Number one, they're frozen. They're frozen because of the prospect that's ahead of them, right? Change management, They understand the security concerns, the documentation that's necessary, the human element, really, that's going to create friction in the organization. And we want to avoid friction as human beings, right? We're always looking for the easy path. And then, speaking of the easy path, there's those who are implementing all kinds of experiments and really just running off the guardrails, right? They're just trying a bunch of things, throwing spaghetti at the wall, and trying to see what sticks. But what I've seen from the ones who are making it work, right? So the 20% that are doing it well are doing a couple of important things, right? Number one, they start with a data foundation, right? This is critical because so much information in the digital supply chain lives inside people's heads, and it lives inside legacy disparate systems, and that data has to be governed. And so it starts with data governance, starts with mapping the supply chain, again getting it out of out of people's heads, documented. There has to be data model discipline. There has to be systems of record, right? All of this has to be mapped out before you can really start implementing anything, right? And then you need to understand, how do I get data out of this system into this system? How do I expose supply chain data? How am I communicating the governance and the accountability, not just with my internal teams, but with my partners as well, right? So this requires a lot of documentation before you ever implement the first point solution. And then the other thing that I would say, as a back end of that, is, what is that solution, right? Like, you have to define it very clearly. It has to be specific, right? It cannot just be general. Oh, I want to, ensure that I have better visibility into, my warehouse operations, what's coming in, how do I predict availability, how do I surface that on a front end or a customer experience online. It needs to be very specific, documented, and we need to address the risk and the trust issues, really, that are holding a lot of these companies back from really taking those first steps. So those are, if I could sum it up in one kind of just statement, right, it would be this, right? Is there governance, right? Is there a system? Do we have clearly defined outcomes? Those business outcomes need to run through a process starting with data, and all of that needs to be tracked and have a continuous feedback loop. And this is really the process that a lot of the organizations I've seen who have done well have implemented. So if you don't have one of those, or if you don't have all of those things and you just have one or two, consider, like, am I ready? Am I ready to start implementing AI and investing both in the human capital as well as the financial capital? And if not, start with the beginning, build the foundation.
Oh, thanks, Matt. So it sounds like change management is definitely one of our big things in there, plus really planning this thing out rather than, as you put it, throwing spaghetti at a wall, although that does sound like fun. So, Dan, did you have anything to add to Matt's answer?
I did. I also think when you're looking at, at a higher level, the question of where does AI create value and where is it mostly hype? To me, when I think about that question, I think human in the loop with AI generally accurately creates value today, but I still feel like autonomous AI agents is still a lot of hype. Um, in my experience, the AI tools that we have today are not sophisticated enough to not have humans in the loop. Humans have to be making those final decisions. I mean, AI can process a lot of data, and can it make decisions? Yes. Is it the decision you want it to make? That is the question, you know? Um, so To me, I believe there's a lot of chatter. I mean, I get 10 emails a week probably about, hey, here's a new autonomous AI agent tool that you can implement. But in my experience so far in working with AI, I believe having a human in the loop is still critical for the technology we have today. So I think AI is a great tool for productivity, but I just have not experienced it where we don't need to have those human beings in loop making those final decisions on what the AI is telling us.
Great point, Dan. I saw a meme this morning actually that pretty much kind of covers what you said. They called AI, if you give a golden retriever a nail gun. Golden retrievers love doing the right thing, they love accomplishing things, but you still need to guide it. And if you tell it nail all the wood shut, it will, of course, put nails in your floor, but it can also nail your front door shut. So again, it needs that guidance from a human. So it's a really good meme. I think you probably can go searching for it and find it. I think it records that quite accurately. All right. On the topic of AI and digital transformation, we now have a question to Kara. Will AI replace planners, or will it simply create a new generation of supply chain decision makers?
Thanks, Jennifer. I really like this question. I too have been in supply chain long enough to have seen the full digital transformation. I started off in my younger days working for Trader Joe's, and so I really had that like frontline experience of supply chain affecting the customer. I personally have no concern that AI is coming for the planner. I think it's coming for parts of planning that have forced talented people to spend half their week collecting data, or chasing the data analysts for the information that you need, right? A couple of people have mentioned the autonomy that AI brings, and while I don't think that an AI chatbot being autonomous, one of the things that I appreciate about AI, particularly for me, is that it has allowed me and my team to quickly analyze data that ordinarily we had to rely on somebody else to do. And for me, that's huge. I'm a big proponent of, being able to do things on your own, and so that's been a huge tool for me, and I've encouraged everyone on my team to use it as well. I also think AI is definitely going to change planning roles, right? The traditional historical planner, could rely on forecasting, data consolidation, all of that stuff. But I think now it's going to take somebody who understands the intricacies of how the supply chain is tied together, right? An optimization model can't recommend the lowest, I mean, it can recommend the lowest cost option, but it doesn't understand supplier relationships, right? It doesn't understand if you have, for instance, a deteriorating production facility. I'm in e-commerce. I've pretty much been in retail my whole life. And I started, like I said, in Trader Joe's and then moved to e-commerce. And my company now, we scale from there's 20 something brands, but one of our biggest brands scales from about 15 million units during Q1 to 3 to 60 million units during Q4. And, if you have a late Thanksgiving, that's happening literally in, 5 weeks. And so we obviously have to scale up and rely on a lot of third-party, 3PL partners. And so I can utilize AI to, lay out the network. I can, all the different intricacies of the different attributes that this brand does, right? It happens to be cards. So, there's different finishes and there's different cuts and there's different colors and envelopes and all of these things. It's holiday cards, right? And I can lay that all out, right? I can lay out the regions. I can lay out the time in transit. I can lay everything out for this, AI, and it will model these numbers beautifully for me. But what it doesn't understand is my relationships that I have with those partners. It doesn't understand that while this partner here that is centrally located may seem like the best candidate to do a particular, substrate, their machinery is, old and it takes longer or it will create a bottleneck for them over here. And so that's where I think I see in other job markets where AI has eliminated so many roles. And I don't feel that that's a risk for people in supply chain. I think we will always have a huge human component to this, right? Especially in the relationships, the negotiations. I spend most of my day negotiating. That's what I do, right? Because and it takes, complex conversations for these negotiations, right? Of course, AI has enabled me to do all of this so much faster. And I really think that now a planner is going to become more of an architect of what's going on, right? Versus before where it's just a numbers. A planner was just a numbers person, basically, right? You give them the numbers, they say, okay, here's what you got to do. Now we have, the ability to sort of architect the whole network. And for somebody like me, excuse me, who has such a complex network all over the world of different 3PLs that we're working with, I'm able to architect much faster and much more efficiently. I can turn around a forecast for a partner that, I got to tell you, when we first started doing this, when I first started with this company, it took us so long to put together a Q4 allocation, just because of all of the vendors and all of the things that we had to take into account, right? And now I get an email just this week. I got an email from a partner saying, "Oh, you know what? Our UV coder. So some of the cars are UV coated, right? Our UV coder has been acting up. We'd like to see if we could just bow out of that part of the business for this Q4." And, in seconds, I'm like, oh, okay, sure. This is how it's going to have an impact on the rest of my network. And also I can just turn that allocation around to them like that. And that has been very, I want to say liberating. And it's allowed me to show people who I feel really have the necessary critical thinking skills and strategic skills for complex planning. I've been able to show them how they can now do that, even though they may not have that background in data analytics, that a lot of us who are planners or, obviously, a little bit above a planner, right? But at the end of the day, that's what we're doing. We're planning production. We're planning, units moving out the door in whatever format that is. It has allowed me to show somebody who I can identify who really has that strategic mindset, but may not have that data analytical skill, how they can use AI to enable themselves to grow and step into a role that they are probably more well suited for than they ever imagined.
Wow. Sounds like it's creating a lot of efficiencies, and I'll say letting people do what people do best, and that's deal with external unpredictable factors, and we'll call it the creative elements of dealing with a sometimes unpredictable environment, which can include people. So who knows, maybe plaid's going to be in season next year for Thanksgiving or something. So anyways, that wonderful unpredictable thing that is humans. So yeah. Well, thank you, Kara. Great insight. Okay, we're going to move topics. So we're going to go on to geopolitics and risk. I've got a question to Dax. How has geopolitics permanently changed the way global supply chains are designed? And what geopolitical risk do business leaders consistently underestimate?
Good deal. Yeah, thanks for the question, Jennifer. I'm super excited to be here, part of the panel. So geopolitics, it's a super simple concept, and there's not a whole lot that's talked about. I'm being facetious, of course. I'm also an older millennial, as Matt brought up earlier, and so that came to maturity at the age of Thomas Friedman, and the world is flat, and global supply chains and all of that good stuff. What made that work And what's missing now is trust, right? I knew that this is what trade lanes would be. I knew I could get consistent freight from India to LA, and I knew what that time frame was going to be, and I knew how to plan for that, and I knew that what my total cost of ownership would be. What we have right now, and the reason that's not possible is the geopolitical framework of inconsistent trade policy and taxes on imports or tariffs. It's nearly impossible to plan for anything. And so that has forced everyone to try to look at, okay, where am I getting what? New tariffs were announced today, 50% on quite a few things out of Canada. And so now I'm sure there are people scrambling, going, okay, this Section 338, what just happened? And does this impact me? And how much of this can I pass on to customers without, causing a riot? And 18 months from now, if we have to do refunds, how do I get that back to my customers? And so again, comes into a lack of trust. And so this makes it difficult to plan a supply chain. The other piece of this is the walking away from trade agreements it's creating new partners. It's causing people who typically wouldn't be working together to start working together. And so what we're going to start seeing is new regionalizations of supply chains, and where you could consistently count on, I've got, solid 20 to 30% of my business is going to be coming from this region. All of a sudden, they don't need you anymore because they found a local source. So that's the biggest issue around geopolitics. And as far as what people aren't planning for, it's understanding your source all the way to the mine or the natural resource. Because when you get down to it, supply chain is the path the product takes from being mined or taken from the earth until it enters a landfill, right? A lot of us look at our internal scope of, this is where I buy stuff, I could do something to it, I sell it, but the full scope of the supply chain starts at the mine, ends at the landfill. Well, if you don't know where the pigment for the paint that you have to paint your item comes from, you may not be aware that when the tidal wave, hits Fukushima nuclear reactor, and now PPG can't make that special red paint you used to use, and your production line shuts down for a month. So from a geopolitical risk, that used to be natural disasters. It used to be wars or things like that, but now it could be, well, tomorrow, what was costing me $10 to bring in is going to cost me $100 to bring in. And it no longer makes viable sense. So that's the primary risks that I see from a geopolitical standpoint.
Thank you, Dax. Do we have anybody from our panel who would like to add to that? No?
I mean, I would like to jump in real quick and just add to what Dax was saying. I think that AI tools have been so important to me and my team, and I'm sure others, for figuring out the situation and being able to analyze it quickly. And like in the heart of the tariffs, when they were changing 3 times a week and, over the weekend, I would come in on a Monday and very first thing would be type into ChatGPT, hey, what happened with tariffs, since, Friday or since last week. And that type of activity and research would have been so difficult and overwhelming without AI tools to be able to do it, to stay on top of all those changes and, all the countries in the world. But I just think that, having AI tools available has at least made it manageable, not easy per se, but at least somewhat manageable to understand what's going on. So you can at least try to ask the questions that Dax was talking about and do that level of planning to have that understanding of what's going on in the world.
Well, thank you. And I'm glad it's not only me who's also using that to figure out what's going on in the world with all its complexities now. ChatGPT and Gemini's got to be some of my go-to stuff for things like that, summarizing all the global risks. So thank you. Glad it's not just me. Okay. Let's go to our next question. So this one, we're going to go back to Dax again. So it's around strategy and leadership. So if you were designing a global supply chain from scratch today, what would you do differently, including strategy, finance, and leadership mindset shifts?
So from a strategy standpoint, I would start with the product itself and the customer. And I'm sure a lot of us have been in experience where you'll get, I need more metal, I need more metal, I need more of this metal, I need more of this metal. Okay, and then, I go out and I secure mill runs worth of capacity of this metal, only to find out, you know what? We should have bought the machined parts rather than buying raw metal, bringing it in here to machine it. We could have machined it in country for a better rate. And that actually changes the tariff that it comes in under. And so I'm paying less in tariffs. And so start with a product in mind, start with a customer in mind, and work backwards from there. Don't take it for granted that whoever developed this product knows the best way to design it. Right. So design for manufacturing was a big play or a big push. And this is expanding on that. And basically it's designed for supply chain. It's how can I be the most efficient? Once you get to that, then it's a matter of, when I'm talking about finance, again, once you've optimized how to build it, where to add value, where not to add value, you've basically gotten to your lowest cost of production. And that's where your highest level of profitability is going to be. So that would be the strategy there. In terms of leadership thinking, it's all about the talent, right? So Matt started out with, discussing how we have all lived the digital transition, right? Talent coming into supply chain today, they've had cell phones since they were 4 years old, right? They get it. They fully expect to be able to pick this up and have the answer at their hands. And if supply chain leaders aren't thinking that way and aren't embracing these AI tools and the digital transformation tools that we have at our fingertips, we're going to miss something. And in that talent, what we need to find is people who are resilient. I mean, that's what this topic is about, right? So it's behavioral leadership questions about, tell me about a time when you got knocked down, what happened, and what did you do? It's not so much, do you know how to place a PO? Or do you understand trade compliance? It's, can you get back up when you get knocked down? Because supply chain going forward, with all the changes that we're having to embrace, that's exactly what it is. It's, you come in like Dan was saying, you read a headline on Saturday and you're like, okay, my Monday just got completely bamboozled and I have to start over. So what do we do? So if I were starting from the ground up, that's where I would look.
Great point, Dax. I've got a counter question to you. Do you think that we can build resilience in our staff?
I think we can. It's so distress is the negative stress, eustress is the positive stress, and you grow through eustress. So don't let your staff get too comfortable. Be pushing them. If you've got a planner that's out and a planner is going to be out next week, take a buyer and say, hey, you know what? You're going to cover for them. And start to implement those types of things to essentially stress them out in a positive way, in a developmental way, and in a way where if they fail, they've got the support. It's like, great, you failed. We learned something. This is how we do it better next time.
Wonderful. Great answer, Dax. And I agree. I do find that people tend to grow most when they are challenged. So definitely agree with you there. All right, let's go on to our next question. So this one is around data and collaboration. This is a question to Dan. Everyone says data is the new oil. Why do so many supply chains still struggle with visibility?
Well, I really like this analogy. I'll be honest, I had not heard this analogy before, but I do really like this analogy. And I think if you think about oil, We have vast amounts of oil, right, available under the earth. But if you don't process it some way and you don't refine it in some way, it's really of very little value to most people. If I found a bunch of oil in my backyard, that's not going to do anything. I can sell it, right? But I can't do anything tactically with that oil without refining it, processing it, and all that. And I really think that data is the same way today. There is a ton of data out there, so much data that a human being can't process it all, can't absorb it all, can't review it all. And, once again, just like the oil analogy, with all that data out there, if you don't have a way to process it and refine it, then it's useless a lot of times, right? I mean, it's analysis paralysis. I say to my team all the time, when everything's important, nothing's important, right? Because everything can't be important. And that's kind of what I think of with this oil and data analogy. All the data, if it's there, it's almost useless to you. However, if you can use, AI tools and digital tools and processes to, once again, process that data and turn it into information. And that is really, to me, where the quote unquote magic happens with AI and digital tools is taking all of that data out there and turning it into information that people can actually use to make smart decisions to run their business. So once again, I think people struggle with visibility just because of the vast volume of the data out there. And I would like to give a real world example. I was working for a distribution company and had just started there working on supply chain and continuous improvement and operations, and started to look into, okay, well, where is all the information that people are using to run this business? And was told, hey, look, here is the company network drive. All of the data is here. So I'm like, oh, great. So I go out there, and there was probably 150 Excel reports, out there with various, names that were almost unintelligible, that were automatically generated, that, got updated on different schedules with different revisions. And so, yeah, there was a huge amount of data there. Was anybody using it? Absolutely not. Was anybody looking at it, doing anything with it? Absolutely not, right? Because it was overwhelming. You didn't know where to look. And even if you did know where to look, you'd open a spreadsheet with all this data and, there was just no way to transform it into information. So that was really what I did. And I took on as, one of my first projects there was, hey, can we go through this data? And, this was before AI was, prevalent and a tool that we all had access to. But even then, being able to mine the data and say what's important, what's not important, and putting, a visual digital dashboard together to say, hey, all right, you don't have to go to a network drive on a schedule. You don't have to pull up all these reports and try to interpret them and see, is this what you need to know or is this not what you need to know? But here's a visual digital dashboard you can use to run your business. Everything you need to know is right there in front of you, right? Color coded. You can see what's working. You can see what's not working. You can see customer opportunities. You can see vendor opportunities. So all of that to say, I think that's a good example of this analogy, right? Without the digital tools, whether it be AI, whether it be a dashboard that you put together, data is just as useless to most people as that oil well spring would be in my backyard if I didn't know what to do with it. But, if you can use those digital tools and processes and AI and automation to take all of that data, narrow it down to what's important and turn that into information for you and your team, then that is the way I think that a supply chain can work its way out of struggling with that visibility that so many struggle with.
Thanks, Dan. Has anybody else on the team had experience with, we'll call it, issues with data visibility or even data quality when using AI or implementing it?
Hey, Jen, I wanted to just jump in there because I also like love the analogy of oil. And Dan said something that was really, really important in that the data is useless unless it goes through a transformation process, right? So many of the systems that we work with, there's a couple of things. There is the translation of the data. First of all, not everybody is on the same page about how we interpret the data, how we talk about the data. So transforming it and refining it, to Dan's point, like really, really important. But also, I would say this, just to take the analogy another step, we need pipes. We need the transportation of the data, right? So this is why agentic tools are so far behind, because it's one thing to access clean, refined data. It's another thing to get the data where it needs to be, and to get and to get it into the hands of the human decision makers who are ultimately responsible. Now, that to me is an opportunity, that comes. You might say it's like phase 2 or 3, but you're right. Like the priority is refining it, but we can't forget that the data needs to live. It needs to be accessible via MCP server or some other AI integration layer.
Great points, Matt. Kara, did you have also a comment to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to say one of the things that we really struggle with in the e-commerce world, and I imagine it's in every supply chain, is naming conventions and identifying the data. And I think that that's another, people will say to me, well, I ask it a question, it doesn't give me the answer, right? Or it gives me the wrong answer. And I always tell people you need to kind of have a conversation with AI, like you would with me. If you asked me a question and I gave you an answer that didn't really make sense with regard to what you were asking me, you would continue on and say, no, I don't think you understood me. This is what I meant, right? And so I think there's a lot of communication and identification of data and things like that needs to, like, that has to be the start, right? In the very beginning, the foundation needs to be that the data is identifiable. And Dan mentioned, being inheriting, a mammoth amount of data without really understanding what it is. And I think that's at the core the issue that I have run into, and I know a lot of other people have run into. Like, you can give me all the data in the world, but if I don't even know what I'm looking at, like if you found oil in your backyard but you thought it was dirt or mud, you then you don't even know what to do with the oil, right? You don't even know who to call about the oil or any of that. So like I think so many companies have so much data, years and years and years worth of data, and maybe have lost the people who even know what that data represents, right? And so I think while we have like this really new cool tool that will help us have that conversation about how to transform the data, I think one of the biggest challenges that we will all face, and particularly for me, because I took over a department that had been run by somebody else for 15 years, is trying to even understand what that data is. And so I really encourage my team now to be as explicit and clear and consistent and standardize any dashboard, anything that we are looking at. And this goes back to the core question, right? Like, if you don't start with a clear understanding of what that data is, it doesn't really matter how you present it, right? Because it's gibberish. So I think all of us are going to be sort of up against that battle for a long time, because we didn't have the technology to store data like we do now, right? Data was stored on a drive in a bunch of files, or sometimes even worse, PDFs, right? And and you're just like, okay, well, thanks for this file of 10,000 different files. And I don't know that we can go back and get all of that organized and cleaned up and named correctly and, translated. But at least moving forward for the future, we can make sure that we go into new situations with clarity.
Yeah, I love the term gibberish there, Kara.
Yeah.
I've been with Evolution since October last year, and as I was onboarding, it was, and here's this dashboard, and my default answer every time I see one is, so what?
Right.
Who who takes action based on this? If it's a
Mhm.
pretty chart, okay, that's great. I get it. You need dashboards for financial reporting and some other things like that. I'm more interested in the translate this into who needs to do what next with this data. And don't show me the 3,000 lines, show me the 3 lines that I need to act on in the next hour. And that's what makes, an effective dashboard, turning that gibberish into action.
Yep.
Love it.
Wonderful. Yeah, I love it too. And now I'm going to go out and refill my car with mud or I don't know, maybe diesel fuel, maybe aircraft fuel. I'm not sure yet. Anyway, I'm just going to rely upon the data upstream to make sure that, they have it all nice and clean and organized so I don't put the wrong thing in my car and get a humongous maintenance bill. So, wonderful conversation, folks. Okay, now we're going to have a last question to our panel. This is going to be the same question to each panelist, and we're going to see what interesting answers they provide us. All right, so let's start with since Dax, we've got you here in the middle. What does great look like in a supply chain? What's an example you can share with us?
So great in a supply chain to me is the data to make the next decision is available at your fingertips. And any handoffs of data is automated. There is no manual entry. So an example of, and this is aspirational, right now we have 4 ERPs that we're working in. And a lot of those are, we get a PO in one, and that creates a sales order to the other, which then gets manually entered as a PO into the other. And so there's a lot of work there. So what great looks like to me is the end of our project plan where we're down to 2 ERPs and we have APIs that automate the interaction between the two. And so it works seamlessly. And so to me, a great supply chain is seamless data interaction and data at your fingertips to drive action.
Thanks, Dax. I'm going to amend that question a bit. I should have said in there what does great look like in a digital supply chain? I know we've all probably run into really good, we'll call it more manual supply chains previously. So I'm going to amend that question to digital supply chain. With that, I'm going to go to Kara next. What does
Yeah.
that look like for you?
Well, so a couple of things. First of all, I agree 100% with Dax that it looks like automated communication, as little room for human error as possible, right? We need the human component, but we are humans, and better to eliminate that human error where we can. I would also say a great supply chain looks like being able to identify and mitigate risk ahead of time. And I think one of the topics I have been thinking about was, simulations and things like that. That's something we've talked about a long time. And so I think a great supply chain means being able to identify and mitigate risk. And I think the use of simulations could be something that would be useful for that, especially for me in particular in e-commerce where things change so rapidly based on a trend or, some TikToker who is all of a sudden made something popular and we have to react very quickly. And so it allows us to see a trend happening before a human might be able to see it and take action on it right away.
Amazing. Thanks, Kara. All right, let's go to Dan. Same question to you.
Interesting question. What does great look like in a digital supply chain? I think we've touched on a lot of the elements, with other people, but to me, there's really 3 parts to it. I think having a simple digital visual dashboard for your digital supply chain so you can very quickly see where things are in control and where things are out of control. Um, like Dax was saying, if you can get notifications, and have it actually tell you when things are out of spec, as opposed to having to wait for somebody to go look for it and say, oh, something's going wrong, even better. So I think that is a very important element of a great digital supply chain. Um, I also excuse me, similar like Dax and Kara were saying, those digital interfaces with your vendors and customers to reduce like manual data entry, manual order input. Um, all of that I think is critical for a great digital supply chain. People are capacity limited on what they can do manually. It takes time, which costs money. It takes effort. And most importantly, to me, humans are prone to human error, right? I mean, you can't sit there and process orders all day, 8, 10 hours a day and not make a mistake or a missed keystroke, right? Or transpose two numbers. I mean, it's just humans are not built to work that way. So, being able to digitize those interfaces with, APIs or, directly engaging with your suppliers and customers to see how your systems can communicate seamlessly, I think is a second, to me, important element of a great digital supply chain. And then I think the third is something else that was briefly touched on earlier, a process map of the entire supply chain process for your business from beginning to end, where you can work with your team and your vendors and your customers to identify, hey, what is value added versus non-value added? Where are the very manual and painful bottlenecks that we have in this process so we can be focused with our AI and automation and process improvement and say, hey, this is our process from beginning to end, starting with the customer because the customer is the most important person, because without the customer, we have no business. So mapping that all out, identifying where are the bottlenecks and the areas of improvement, and then, having a plan to say, hey, we're going to go after these, this is the top 1, 2, 3 areas that are painful for us. What can we do to automate? What can we do to add AI? What can we do to reduce, errors and human intervention? And then being very strategic about that as you work through to come up with the most seamless, and digital supply chain that you can. So to me, great looks like having those three elements. And I mean, it's hard to say, looking for an example, it's hard not to use Amazon as the example of a great digital supply chain, right? I mean, they're hooked up to their vendors, they're hooked up to their customers digitally. They've got everything, processes for everything. You can't even talk to a human if you want to, let alone need to talk to a human. So, to me, I've had many conversations over the years with leaders and team members saying, hey, let's try to create an Amazon-like experience to the best we can, because to me, they figured it out sooner than anyone else.
Thanks, Dan. Okay, our final panelist, Matt. Same question to you.
Well, what can you honestly say after that? I think Dax started off really well. I mean, it is about, the fluidity, right? Removing the friction. When I think about a great supply chain, a digital supply chain, I'm not thinking about technology. That's not the first place my head goes. There is amazing technology. Systems are getting better and better every day. AI is changing the way that we are doing our day-to-day jobs. But at the end of the day, I think it really comes down to culture and leadership, the courage to change, the courage to open up visibility across the supply chain. Traditional supply chain often looks like hiding things like inventory in order to negotiate better, hiding demand signals, right? Because you think it's a competitive advantage. This requires the, conviction to fundamentally change the way we're going to communicate across, both with our customers as well as our supply partners. And so, really, you can have all the technology in the world and you can implement some of these best practices. But Amazon's doesn't create the most frictionless commerce experience because they have the right technology. It's because of the way their leadership thinks about the customer experience. And at the end of the day, we're all serving customers, right? And so, how do they want to trade with us? That's the important thing. So, if you can open up, if you're able to access demand signals, and if you're able to access real-time inventory and pricing, and you're able to give access to your customer downstream, that is, and then of course put a beautiful wrapper on it, build a beautiful e-commerce site, or buyer portal or sourcing portal, uh, cherry on top. But it really starts with leadership and the courage to open up the supply chain.
Thanks, Matt. That's a really detailed answer, and I think that rings true for so many of us here on the call today. Okay, and with that, unfortunately, we're out of time today, but for all our attendees, if you've put any questions in the chat box, I believe you have a chat box available there somewhere. Our folks at Tech Summit will send those forward to us. We'll try our best as panelists to answer those and get those back to you within a realistic time frame. But anyways, we're going to wrap up now. I'd like to thank all of our panelists today. Thank you for the insights and the great discussion. Thank you for being here today. And for our attendees, we hope you enjoyed your time with us and you learned something new about digital supply chains and building them for resilience. Okay, folks, our panel discussion is now concluded. Have yourselves a wonderful week.
Thanks,
Thanks all.
Jennifer, for being a great moderator.
Thanks, folks.